The last record player in Elias Miller's neighborhood had been destroyed 5 years ago, smashed to pieces on the cracked asphalt of Monroe Street, while enforcement officers stood watching, their faces impassive behind regulation masks. Elias remembered the sound it made, not music, but a death rattle of plastic, metal, and memory. Standing at his apartment window now, watching the grey October rain blur the identical concrete buildings across the street, he could still hear that sound. "Daddy, what are clouds made of?" 6-year-old Lyra tugged at his worn jeans, her dark curls bouncing as she looked up at him with curious eyes, her mother's eyes. "Water," he answered, attempting a smile. "Tiny drops of water floating in the sky." "Like tears?" she asked, her small face scrunching with the effort of connecting ideas. Elias swallowed hard. Something like that. Regulations against music had begun gradually after the riots of '37. First came restrictions on public performances, then bans on streaming services, and finally the Harmonic Security Act that criminalized all musical expression. The official reasoning cited music's emotionally destabilizing effects on social cohesion. 17 months after Sarah's death, Elias still couldn't bring himself to tell Lyra that her mother had been arrested for humming a lullaby to a neighbor's feverish child. "Time for school," he said, gathering Lyra's backpack. Their small apartment felt emptier each day, despite the surveillance devices he knew were hidden in the walls. The morning routine was always the same. Breakfast of rationed protein supplements, teeth brushing monitored by the bathroom smart mirror that analyzed dental hygiene and water usage, and the walk to Harmony Elementary, where Lyra would spend her day learning optimized education protocols. "Mr. Miller," Principal Warden nodded as they reached the school's concrete entrance. Her voice was calibrated to the regulation cadence, flat, measured, without the rises and falls that might suggest melody. "Good morning." Elias matched her tone perfectly, a skill he'd mastered through fear. "Your quarterly compliance evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow. The district has noted your consistent punctuality." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's appreciated." Lyra squeezed his hand before letting go. "Bye, Daddy. Remember," he whispered, kneeling to her level, "inside voices only." The walk to the factory was longer, since they'd relocated the family housing units. Elias joined the stream of grey and navy uniforms flowing toward the industrial sector. His position at the Auditory Compliance Materials plant was secure, ironically manufacturing the foam and insulation that deadened sound in government buildings. "Miller." Supervisor Chen appeared beside him, matching his stride. "Extra shift tonight. Shipment for the new detention center." "My daughter," Elias began. "Community care is available." Chen's tone left no room for discussion. "The district appreciates your cooperation." By evening, Elias's hands were raw from handling the chemical compounds that went into acoustic suppression materials. The factory's constant white noise, designed to prevent any accidental rhythmic patterns in the machinery, had given him the familiar end-of-day headache. When he finally retrieved Lyra from the sterile community care facility, her usual brightness seemed dimmed. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked as they walked home through the monitored streets. "Nothing." She kept her eyes on the sidewalk. Inside their apartment, she sat at the small table, pushing the rehydrated dinner around her plate. Elias noticed a small red mark on her wrist. "What happened?" His heart raced as he gently examined her arm. "Ms. Tappan said I was making sounds." Lyra's voice was barely audible. "She said it was almost like—" She stopped, afraid to say the word. "Like what?" Elias asked, though he already knew. "Like singing." Tears filled her eyes. "But I wasn't, Daddy. I promise. I was just breathing funny." Elias pulled her close, his mind racing. Children were often the first to slip up, their natural inclination toward rhythm and melody a dangerous liability. He'd heard whispered stories of children separated from their parents for rehabilitation. "It's okay," he lied, stroking her hair. "Just be more careful tomorrow." That night, after tucking Lyra into bed, Elias sat in the dark living room, staring at the wall where once, in another life, Sarah's guitar had hung. Behind that wall now was a hollowed-out space, sealed with his own factory's materials, containing the last fragment of music in their lives. A small music box that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother. He hadn't opened it since the laws passed. Couldn't risk it. As Elias finally drifted to sleep in his chair, he didn't hear the soft, perfect notes coming from his daughter's room. A melody she couldn't possibly know, one her mother used to sing, emerging from Lyra's lips like a revelation. Chapter 2. The alarm pulsed at exactly 6 a.m., a regulation pattern designed to wake without rhythm. Elias silenced it quickly, his compliance evaluation looming like a shadow over the day. As he prepared breakfast, Lyra seemed unusually quiet, watching him with intensity. "Sleep well?" he asked, setting down her nutrient-enriched oatmeal. "I had a dream," she whispered, looking around as if checking for listeners. "There were colors in the air, Daddy. They moved like—" She gestured with her small hands, flowing and undulating. Elias felt cold fear spread through his chest. "Dreams are just brain signals, Lyra. Remember what they teach you in cognitive development? Just electrical impulses." She nodded, but her eyes held something he hadn't seen before, a spark of defiance, of knowing. They finished breakfast in silence, the only sound the mechanical hum of the apartment's air filtration system. Outside, the November morning was sharp with cold. Wind whipped between the uniform buildings, carrying the scent of industrial chemicals from the eastern sector. As they walked to school, Elias noticed Lyra's lips moving slightly. "Stop that," he hissed, squeezing her hand. "I wasn't doing anything," she protested, but her voice carried an unfamiliar lilt. At the school entrance, Officer Mendez stood beside Principal Warden, his enforcement uniform crisp, the sound suppression device at his belt glowing active. Elias felt Lyra stiffen beside him. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Principal Warden said. "We've had reports of auditory anomalies in classroom block C7 yesterday. The children are being individually assessed today." Elias maintained his neutral expression through years of practice. "I'm sure the district will locate the source efficiently." "Indeed." Officer Mendez's eyes flicked to Lyra, then back to Elias. "Compliance begins at home, doesn't it, Mr. Miller?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Elias knelt to say goodbye to Lyra, whispering fiercely in her ear, "Not a sound today. Do you understand? Not one unusual sound." Her eyes widened at his intensity, but she nodded. At the factory, tension hung in the air like the chemical particulates. 3 workers had been removed yesterday, unusual even for a high-compliance zone like theirs. Elias kept his head down, methodically assembling sound-dampening panels, ignoring the occasional glances from Supervisor Chen. During lunch break, his compliance evaluation notification buzzed. 5:30 p.m., Residential Assessment Unit. Late enough that he'd barely have time to collect Lyra first. He wondered if that was intentional. "Heard about your neighbor," said Davis, a co-worker who'd started the same week as Elias years ago. It was the first personal comment anyone had made to him in months. "What neighbor?" Elias kept his voice neutral, though his stomach tightened. "Apartment 3C. Greeley. They took him this morning." Davis didn't look up from his protein cube. Someone reported humming. Greeley was 83, a widower who sometimes watched Lyra when community care was full. He had hearing difficulties from years working the old manufacturing lines before sound regulations. "He probably didn't even hear himself," Elias murmured. Davis shrugged. "Doesn't matter anymore, does it?" The afternoon dragged, each minute pulling like taffy as Elias watched the clock. At exactly 4:45, he signed out, practically running to the school. Lyra wasn't in her usual waiting spot. His heart hammered as he approached the administrative office. "Mr. Miller," Principal Warden stood in the doorway. "We need to discuss Lyra's assessment." Inside, Lyra sat small and still in an adult-sized chair, her feet dangling above the floor. Relief flooded him when he saw no marks, no signs of distress. "Lyra demonstrated excellent compliance today," Principal Warden said, her tone revealing nothing. However, 2 classmates reported that yesterday during recess she was making pretty sounds with her mouth. Children misunderstand things, Elias said quickly. She was probably just breathing heavily from playing. Perhaps. Principal Warden studied him. Given your compliance history and your family situation, we've marked this as an isolated incident. But Lyra will be moved to the enhanced monitoring group. Elias nodded, gratitude and fear mingling in his chest. Thank you for your understanding. They walked home in silence, Elias constantly scanning their surroundings, aware that they might be more closely watched now. Halfway there, Lyra tugged his hand. "Daddy, I didn't do it on purpose," she said softly. "It just came out." "What came out, Lyra?" He kept walking, afraid to stop. "The sounds. They're inside me. Like colors." Elias felt dizzy suddenly, remembering Sarah saying almost those exact words years ago. They barely made it inside the apartment before his compliance evaluation notification buzzed again, postponed until tomorrow. He collapsed onto the couch, relief and dread washing over him in equal measure. That night, after Lyra was asleep, he sat in the bathroom with the shower running. The one place monitoring was limited for privacy regulations. He pressed his forehead against the cool tile and did something he hadn't done since Sarah was taken. He cried, silent tears for a world where his daughter's natural joy was a death sentence. He didn't hear the soft melody coming from her room again, didn't see how her fingers tapped a gentle rhythm against her blanket, didn't notice the neighbor in apartment 2B pressing an ear to the wall, eyes wide with forgotten wonder. Chapter 3. The Harmonic Security Patrol vehicles were parked outside their building when Elias woke. Through the narrow window, he watched enforcement officers entering the main doors, their sound detection equipment gleaming dully in the early morning light. Heart pounding, he rushed to Lyra's room. She was sitting up in bed, her curls wild from sleep, humming, actually humming, a simple, repetitive pattern. The sound stopped him cold in the doorway. "Lyra!" he hissed, crossing the room in 2 strides. "Stop that right now!" Her eyes widened with hurt. "But Daddy, it's beautiful. Listen." "No!" He covered her mouth with his hand, then immediately regretted his roughness when tears sprang to her eyes. More gently he whispered, "Baby, you can't make those sounds. They're dangerous. The officers are in our building right now." Fear replaced the hurt in her expression. She nodded beneath his hand, and he slowly removed it. "Get dressed," he instructed, keeping his voice steady despite the panic coursing through him. "We need to leave for school early today." As Lyra changed, Elias paced the small living room, running through their options. His compliance evaluation would flag any unusual movement patterns. They couldn't run. Where would they even go? The Free Territories were just rumors, likely propaganda to identify dissenters. His mind raced to his neighbor, Mr. Greeley, now gone. Had he heard Lyra? Had he reported them before being taken himself? "Ready, Daddy." Lyra appeared, her school uniform neatly fastened, hair hastily brushed. They slipped from the apartment, Elias holding his breath as they passed the elevator where 2 officers were questioning a woman from the 5th floor. Taking the stairs, they emerged into the side alley, the cold air biting at their faces. "We're going a different way today," Elias explained, guiding Lyra through back streets he'd memorized years ago but never needed to use. "Because of the officers?" she asked, her voice small. "Just a precaution," he reassured her, though his eyes constantly scanned for patrols. They arrived at the school 40 minutes early. Principal Warden raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Elias signed Lyra in. Before leaving, he knelt to her level. "Remember what we talked about. Not a single unusual sound. If anyone asks about home, everything is normal, understand?" She nodded solemnly. "I understand, Daddy." At work, Elias moved mechanically through his tasks, flinching at every announcement over the factory's communication system. During his break, he slipped away to the maintenance corridor where reception was better and checked the building's enforcement activity log, public information under transparency laws. 3 apartments had been searched, 5D, 4A, and 2B. Not theirs, not yet. When his compliance evaluation notification buzzed again, rescheduled for 6 p.m., Elias nearly dropped his work tablet. The third postponement in 2 days was unprecedented. Miller, Supervisor Chen approached his station. "You're requested in administration." The walk to the administrative offices felt like a march to execution. Instead of the enforcement officers he expected, Elias found District Compliance Director Hammond waiting, a thin-faced man with eyes that seemed to catalogue every micro-expression. "Mr. Miller," Hammond gestured to a chair, "your file indicates consistent compliance since your wife's unfortunate separation, yet we've detected anomalies in your residential block." "I've noticed the increased enforcement presence," Elias said carefully. "It's concerning." "Indeed," Hammond studied him. "Your neighbor in 2B was reported for auditory appreciation, claimed he heard beautiful sounds coming through the walls." "Your walls, Mr. Miller." Elias's mouth went dry. "The building's insulation is substandard. I've filed maintenance requests. Perhaps he heard the pipes." "Perhaps." Hammond's expression didn't change. "Your daughter's school has also flagged potential auditory infractions. Children misunderstand regulations sometimes," Elias said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I've been working with her on compliance." Hammond nodded slowly. "Your compliance evaluation will proceed tonight as scheduled. I recommend thorough preparation of your residence." The dismissal was clear. As Elias left, legs weak with fear, he made a decision. He couldn't wait for them to come. By evening they would have processed Mr. Greeley and the neighbor from 2B. They would have testimony. Instead of returning to the factory floor, Elias slipped out a maintenance exit. The penalty for work abandonment was severe, but nothing compared to what awaited at home if he did nothing. He moved quickly through the city, keeping to secondary streets, his mind racing through possibilities. At a public terminal, he used his work credentials to access building schematics for their residential block. There it was, a maintenance tunnel running beneath the building, connecting to the old subway system, now used for supply transport. It wasn't freedom, but it was time. Time to figure out what to do about Lyra's dangerous gift. When school dismissed, Elias was waiting in the secondary pickup area, heart thundering in his chest. "Daddy!" Lyra looked confused. "You're never here this early." "Change of plans," he said, taking her hand. "We're going on a little trip." "What about your work? What about my homework?" Her questions tumbled out as he led her quickly away from the school. "Sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "there are more important things than rules." Her eyes widened at this heresy, but she squeezed his hand tighter. As they wound through increasingly unfamiliar streets, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of making a choice that couldn't be undone. Behind them, a patrol vehicle turned onto the street, lights flashing silently, and Elias pulled Lyra into a narrow passage between buildings, pressing a finger to his lips as they huddled in the shadows, waiting for the danger to pass. Chapter 4. The maintenance tunnel smelled of damp concrete and rusting metal. Elias guided Lyra forward with one hand, the other holding his tablet. Its screen dimmed to the lowest setting. The building schematics showed 3 possible exits, but 2 would likely be monitored. "Are we playing hide-and-seek?" Lyra whispered, her small voice echoing slightly despite the sound-dampening materials lining the walls. "Something like that," Elias answered, trying to keep his tone light. "We need to be very quiet, like mice." They moved slowly through the darkness, passing utility junctions and abandoned equipment. After 20 minutes, they reached a heavy metal door marked Transport Sector Access, Authorized Personnel Only. "This is it," Elias murmured, examining the electronic lock. His factory credentials wouldn't work here, but he remembered something Sarah had once told him. Before the bans, she'd worked as a sound engineer for Metropolitan Infrastructure. She'd mentioned maintenance overrides. His fingers trembled as he pried open the control panel and connected his tablet. 3 failed attempts would trigger an alert. Taking a deep breath, he entered the sequence Sarah had recited years ago. A date, a code, a rhythm. The lock remained red. "Daddy?" Lyra's voice quavered in the darkness. "It's okay." he assured her, though it wasn't. He tried again, adjusting the sequence slightly. Still nothing. Lyra moved closer to the panel, studying it with curious eyes. "It looks like a pattern," she said softly, "like the ones in my dreams." Before Elias could stop her, she reached out and pressed her small fingers against the keypad in a distinct rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, pause, 1, 2. The light turned green. The door unlocked with a soft click. "How did you—" Elias began, stunned. "I don't know," she said, her eyes wide with confusion and something else. Recognition. It felt right, like when the sounds come. Speechless, Elias pushed the door open, revealing a vast underground chamber. Old subway tracks stretched into darkness, but to their right, a small maintenance cart sat unattended. Hope flared in his chest. "Come on," he whispered, lifting Lyra into the cart. The electric vehicle hummed to life, barely audible as they moved deeper into the tunnel system. According to the maps, these lines connected to the agricultural sectors outside the city, less monitored, easier to disappear in. "Daddy, where are we going?" Lyra asked, as abandoned stations flashed by. "Somewhere safe," he said, though he wasn't sure such a place existed anymore. "Somewhere you won't have to hide what's inside you." After 30 minutes, the cart's battery warning flashed. They'd have to continue on foot. Elias helped Lyra down, and they walked along the maintenance path beside the tracks. His compliance watch had stopped working underground, a small mercy, as by now their absence would have been noted. "I'm tired," Lyra said eventually, her steps slowing. Elias scooped her up, her small weight a comfort against his chest. Just a little further. They reached a station marked Agricultural Transfer Point. Above them, faint daylight filtered through grates in the ceiling. The exit would lead them to the outskirts, where enforcement was spread thinner. As they climbed the access ladder, Elias heard voices above. He froze, holding Lyra tight against him. "Sweep this sector again," a man was saying. "Director Hammond is convinced they came this way." "Waste of resources," another voice replied. "Two people can't just disappear." Elias's mind raced. They were trapped. Going back meant capture. Going forward meant the same. Beside his ear, Lyra whispered, "Daddy, I need to sing." "No, baby," he hissed. "They'll hear you." "I know," she said, with a certainty that startled him. "I want them to." Before he could stop her, Lyra began to sing, not a childish tune or a half-remembered melody, but something hauntingly beautiful, notes rising and falling like the breath of someone awakening from a long sleep. The sound echoed in the concrete chamber, amplified by the very architecture designed to deaden such vibrations. Elias waited for shouts, for alarms, for the sound of boots on the ladder. Instead, silence fell above them. Then, incredibly, a third voice spoke. "What is that sound? I haven't heard anything like that since—" The first voice trailed off. "Before the laws," the second voice finished. Lyra continued singing, her eyes closed in concentration. Elias held her, torn between terror and awe, as the sound of his daughter's voice, so like her mother's, filled the space around them. Slowly, carefully, he climbed the remaining rungs. At the top, 2 enforcement officers stood motionless, their faces transformed by something Elias had nearly forgotten existed: wonder. The younger officer noticed him first, hand moving instinctively toward his weapon, then stopping. "That sound," he said. "Your daughter?" Elias nodded, ready to shield Lyra with his body if necessary. "My grandmother used to sing," the officer said, his voice rough with emotion. "Before." "We all heard music once," said the older officer, his enforcement mask now hanging loosely around his neck. "Before they convinced us it was dangerous." Lyra's song ended, the final notes lingering in the air like a question. "You should arrest us," Elias said quietly. The officers exchanged looks. "Our equipment is malfunctioning," the older one said eventually. "Hasn't picked up any unauthorized sounds. Must be the tunnel interference." Relief flooded through Elias as understanding dawned. "How long will the malfunction last?" "Long enough for you to reach the eastern agricultural sector," the younger officer replied, not meeting his eyes. "There's a community there. Others who, remember, Others who sing, the older officer added softly. My brother joined them last year. I haven't reported him. Elias set Lyra down, his legs shaky with adrenaline and hope. Thank you. The younger officer handed him a small device. This will mask your compliance signals for 48 hours. After that, you're on your own. As dawn broke over the eastern fields, Elias and Lyra walked away from the city, its uniform buildings receding behind them. In the distance, the agricultural domes rose like massive shells against the sky. Between them, small communities of workers lived with less scrutiny, less monitoring. Can I sing there, Daddy? Lyra asked, her small hand warm in his. Elias looked down at his daughter, this miracle who had somehow carried music inside her when the world had tried to silence it completely. Yes, he said, feeling something unfurl in his chest, something that had been tightly wound for years. I think you can, and maybe, he hesitated, then finished the thought, maybe you can teach me how to remember too. As they walked toward the horizon, Lyra began to hum softly, and for the first time since Sarah was taken, Elias didn't try to stop her. Instead, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, he joined her, note by imperfect note, reclaiming a piece of their humanity with every step toward freedom.